I'm Ash.
And I'm Callie.
And welcome to Paved with Gold, the eating disorder recovery podcast. I want to acknowledge the traditional landowners on which we are recording, the Gadigal and Gubbi people. Today, we're talking about something that honestly doesn't get talked about enough. We know that recovering from eating disorders can take a long time. The average, depending on which research you're looking at, can range from 7 to 10 years. But of course, that's a very conservative estimate, especially when you look beyond typical definitions of recovered, recovery, all that stuff, and lack of diagnosis, all of that stuff. The duration of eating disorders also varies wildly. Some can last just a few years, while others can last decades. Every eating disorder is dangerous no matter what type and no matter the length of time it is most active. However, today we're going to be taking a closer look at what it means to be living with and or be diagnosed with severe and enduring eating disorders, also known as SEED. You may recognize this term if you have listened to Callie speak basically ever, because she had received that diagnosis. And if you go back and listen to our early episode where Callie shares her story, which I highly recommend that you do, I know that she's very passionate about this.
Could bang on forever.
And we probably will.
Hence, we needed guests to talk about it to bang on forever with.
Now, while I'm sure Callie can do a great job talking to this topic by herself, we're never one to deny backup. So today we are joined by a credentialed eating disorder clinician and lived experience advocate and researcher. She's currently undertaking her PhD with the Body Image and Eating Disorders Research Group at the University of Queensland, focusing on the impact of medical trauma in the severe and enduring eating disorder population. So we're in good hands here. Mm-hmm. She also works as a counsellor and lived experience coordinator at the Swan Centre in Western Australia. Today, it is our absolute pleasure to welcome Gabby Lubieniecki to the show.
Hello!
Hi, thanks for having me.
Welcome. Very excited.
It is our absolute pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
As we always do on this podcast, we always want to highlight and share lived experience because we think that should be the core of eating disorder recovery. So you have a lived experience with SEED. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, certainly. I've found out something recently, which might also tie into some of your latest podcast episodes. I recently spoke with my mum, and given the work I do, I was talking about ARFID and neurodivergence, and mum was like, oh, actually, that's quite funny because I took you to see a doctor when you were like 4 because you'd only like have milk and eat mashed potato.
Oh,
and I was like, Mum,
interesting.
You're only telling me this.
You've never mentioned this before.
So, knowing that now, I think it, adds to the tapestry of my story.
Oh my God.
But for me, probably first started, I was an awkward kid, really nerdy, just used to I'd run away with my books. That was my kind of thing. And when I kind of moved from primary school to high school, that is when I started noticing my eating disorder symptoms. Restricting, then purging, and being teenage years as well. They're never fun. And so by the time I was 17, I knew something was wrong. Really a lot of anxiety, a lot of, perfectionism, just that overwhelming feeling like I was never good enough. And took myself, without telling my parents, to a psychologist. So saved up my money and went to a...
Wow.
Yeah, so we're kind of... And look, there's probably some things in there where, there was a bit of self-harm and it never got noticed. And so I think it was one of those things where I was self-harming, but no one ever said anything. And I was like, okay, well, you can kind of tell. But anyway, so I went to this psychologist, and as you'd know, it's really scary being vulnerable and sharing that. And was met with, well, that's what all teenage girls do.
Helpful.
Yeah. So
Ash's eyes just rolled so far back in her head. Oh God. Yes, continue. Sorry.
no, and I think that kind of kickstarted a lot of hiding, a lot of mask wearing, a lot of suffering in silence. So through my late teens, early 20s, I did not seek help. The first time I ever ended up in hospital was when I was 23, when I drove to my parents' house, and I was so distressed, and my mum took me to the hospital and carried me into emergency. Unfortunately, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about, this was at a public hospital, so the diagnosis I got, which completely ignored my eating disorder behaviors, was that I had borderline personality disorder. Once again, Ash, I see you rolling your eyes.
There's a reason I have this Rolls Eyes sticker on my laptop. If anyone has seen any clips of us on Instagram, it's always right there at the top, because I do that regularly now.
I feel like and there it is.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
This will totally be a future episode, by the way, of misdiagnosis of BPD with borderline personality disorder, with eating disorders and
trauma and
the works.
Other things.
Yeah. And
cool.
Yeah. So 2 years of my life was under a psychiatrist who I was on 13 different types of medication. I don't remember much of anything. Eventually stopped seeing him and saw a different psychiatrist and had my first private inpatient. And that was really eye-opening as well, because the psychiatrist was really quite responsive and was like, no, you don't have BPD. You've got, you've got no coping skills, terrible emotional regulation, and you're using your eating disorder as a coping strategy. And so that was probably the first time I was like, but I was never, there was always this kind of underlying thing that the eating disorder was there, but it was never really fully acknowledged. And then, cut forward to nearly 10 years ago, as I was turning 30, and my eating disorder had I'd gone back to pretending everything was fine, kind of going through the motions of being a stable, and I say that in inverted commas, a stable adult who had a job and do this, and, event on the odd occasion.
Functioning.
Yeah. And on the odd occasion I'd, go missing for a few weeks and going, whether I'd self-harmed or an ambulance had been called, and I'd go in, I'd be taken in, be in a locked ward, tell the nurses that I just forgot to take my tablets, and then I'd get back out again and then keep going. And then, so just before my 30th birthday, kind of culminated with the death of a grandparent. I really declined. My eating disorder was front and center. And that resulted in a hospitalization just after my 30th birthday, which was horrific. It was a locked public ward. I drove myself to emergency and I kind of said, this is what's happening. And the person that was in the room with me at the time, who was talking to me, kept repeating things back to me that were incorrect. And I remember being so frustrated and saying, like, you're not actually hearing what I'm saying to you. And that resulted in me going into this locked ward for about a month and very much not looked after, no real meal support or anything like that. It was just, and very met with that kind of, well, you're 30, like, you've got a job, you're not really sick, you should, you shouldn't be here, you're taking up a bed, you're, like, and so there was a lot of judgment, and just and not a lot of help. Like, I didn't there were no programs, there were not, like, it was just stay in bed, but they were happy for me to have my BlackBerry, if anyone remembers those from back in the day. Like, so I'd still be working. And,
Oh yes, yeah.
And it was just no care whatsoever. And then
it was basically just pure, let's get you medically stabilized and
get you out of here.
Just get you out of there.
And I don't even think it was medical stabilization.
I was going to say, it doesn't even sound like it was that, right?
No, it was, I think it was just like she's rocked up to emergency and we've got nowhere else to put her. Let's just...
Got to put her somewhere.
Yeah. And so shortly after that, I packed up and moved interstate and kept pretending until... I realized I couldn't keep pretending, and I was really fortunate enough to have been. I went to my GP, who was really lovely, and probably the first GP who actually went, no, this is a problem. Like this is like you shouldn't be feeling like this. Like you shouldn't have to.
This shouldn't be your life. Yeah.
And so was referred to this psychologist, and for the first probably 3 months, it was very performative on my behalf, expecting the same shit. Sorry for swearing, but not sorry for swearing.
No, swear, please.
and then just having her look at me once, and this is, to this day, it's burnt into my mind. She just looked at me and she was like, "You don't have to keep doing this with me." Like, she's like, "I know who you are and I see you and I know how much you're hurting.
Oh,
and
that's lovely.
You don't have to pretend with me." And I remember just bursting, I was sitting on the couch and I kind of you see when we see in a cartoon, slid off the couch and onto the floor into the fetal position, and I just cried and cried and cried.
Okay, so I'm about to cry.
And I think that for me was the beginning of the journey of recovery, because it was more than an eating disorder. She looked at me like a person, right?
Somebody saw you.
Yeah. I wasn't put into a box of this or that. And, I was with her for 6 years.
Wow.
And...
just the power of validation, I think, is so incredible. And it's for so long, you kind of just get put into this too hard basket and then, or just overlooked as a problem that needs to be dealt with. And then for someone just to say, "You're really hurting and I'm seeing that and I'm sorry," kind of thing. And let's stop pretending because it's only making it worse is massive.
See you as that person.
Shout out to that doctor.
Yeah,
oh my
see you as an actual person, right?
Yeah, not a diagnosis, and also not just an eating disorder, right? I think, and when I have been inpatient, and when you're seen as this, and so they only people only focus on such a tiny amount of you, when we are complex beings. There's cultural background, there's sometimes complex trauma, there's neurodiversity, and for her to kind of go no one had ever talked to me about perfectionism, and she said some stuff to me about you don't have to be perfect, and I was having a panic attack, and she's like, no one needs...
What do you mean?
No one needs you to have all your shit together. You're allowed to be vulnerable. And I was like, oh, what is this thing you're talking about?
What do you mean? This people, what?
It's excuse me, I think I know better. Look where I've gotten. Aren't I doing so well?
Exactly. But and for her to kind of I even had, when I was seeing her, and I had one particular time that was or around the Christmas New Year break, where I had the crisis team called because I was trying to get inpatient admission to an eating disorder ward, and it was so hard. And my psychologist was really advocating for me, which was amazing. She would call them every day and she would send them letters and things that had never been done for me before. And she got the CAT team to come out and have a look. And don't know if you have the CAT team in different states, you know, like, but
Yeah. So yeah, like my brain just like malfunctioned. Yeah, like acute care.
yeah, so they're a mental health crisis team. They come and visit you,
Yeah.
but they came out and, you know, just from my perspective and what I needed, they saw that I was in my 30s. I held down a job. I lived in an apartment. My apartment was clean. And what's the problem?
So common.
Yeah. And it was just really hard to have this one person who's saying, yes, you need to be in hospital. Yes, we need to show you. Then having a team come to the house be like, yeah, so what's wrong? Like,
no, everything's fine. Yeah. 100%.
I think that's where, and look, part of it is an absolutely capitalist problem, in the case that our system is so broken and so underfunded and so limited with the amount of resources that we can dedicate to people, that only the sickest, quote unquote, visibly,
very much that triage kind of.
Yeah, it's visibly seen as, oh, well, I'm not sick enough. Only the worst, quote unquote, get help. Even though worst is absolutely subjective, and you may be actually at your physical, mental, emotional worst. But, and it kind of just plays into the eating disorder again of like, well, I'm not sick enough. There are always people who are, need help more than me, or so you're just taking up a bed. And when the system absolutely kind of reinforces that, it's so messed up. And that is why we are in a mental health crisis, and why eating disorders just are rife and untreated, and why eating disorders such as like SEED exist in the first place when they absolutely shouldn't. But we'll get into that later. Sorry. Yes, as you were saying.
and so I suppose that, that, like you said, it reinforced it. So kept wearing the mask, and then kept having weekly sessions with my psychologist, who kept saying, no, this is a problem and you are worthy of treatment. And she was having to undo so much of that invalidation and stigma and trauma that I'd been through. I didn't get an admission that time. Like, they offered the bed to me, like, I think 3 months later. And by that point, I was back to kind of masking, and just eventually I did go inpatient. I went general mental health, because I'd managed to kind of get on maybe more, or she'd really worked with me on kind of getting on top of things, and also from a emotional regulation, coping skills, unpacking perfectionism, what was driving it. That I did finally get to a place where that kind of care was what I needed. So whilst the last inpatient admission I had was great, it was more from a mental health perspective, to just kind of have time out. And then I slowly realized that recovery was something that I could get into. And it was surprising, where you kind of go, I can do this. All this time where people have been telling me, oh no, you've had it for too long, see you later.
Yeah, you're too complex. Yeah.
Oh, you must be treatment resistant. But what treatment have you given me? Like, I'm not really sure. Like,
and what state have I been in when you have given it to me?
Yeah, exactly. And what things have we not noticed? Like, I'm in the process of seeking an autism diagnosis.
There it is. Yeah, exactly right.
Right,
yeah.
and it's taken a long time to kind of unpack that, and to have to shed a lot of stuff that I was that kind of mask, right? And I've spoken to a lot of people with severe and enduring, and there's very much this. I go out into the public and I wear one mask, and I come home, I take that one off, and I'm so exhausted, and then I feel the pain, and that pain is not validated by the outside world.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it absolutely is kind of going out into that kind of outside space, and you kind of have to wear that mask, don't you? Because it's like, well, I have to live my life with this. So how do I function in a way that isn't just complete crisis all the time? Even though you are in kind of crisis all the time, it's just kind of figuring out a way that you can function. So then it does kind of perpetuate this idea that, like, okay, so this is just how you, and I think there is this idea in society that like folk with severe and enduring just live their life like this. Like, this is incurable. This is, something that will be lifelong. And I think that just perpetuates it, because it's just like, well, okay, I'm going out and getting a job. I'm just going to have to function because this is my life. And you kind of resign to that, don't you? You're just kind of like, yeah, well, you're right. Okay, so how do I live with this?
Yeah, and I think what we're also, you're talking about a power dynamic as well, right?
Absolutely.
From a young age, we look at the hospital system, the healthcare system, and this is not bagging out people that work in the healthcare system because there are some amazing people there. But
of course,
we see doctors, we see GPs, we see nurses as they know what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
And if they're the ones telling you that you're never going to get better, or that you're treatment resistant, or you're too complex, you go, okay, well, where do I fit in this world then? Because I've just been told by the people that are supposed to help cure me,
care for me,
that I'm a lost cause, and all that does.
Especially when you enter that public system, right? That public system, I feel like there's such this and I'm sure we'll get into this, but such this disconnect between the public and the private as well, of like the public and, again, incredible people on both sides. This isn't, bagging out anybody, but I feel like, this disconnect of like in the private system, we're saying all of this stuff of like, you can recover, we can do this, we can, we're going to work with this. Although I don't even always think that that's the case, but, hopefully in an ideal world. But the public system, I feel like, again, no bagging out on them, but I feel like the public system is very much straight up that, well, we need to get you in, kind of treat what we can and get you out. Like you are treatment resistant. You aren't, like you are, I guess, complex. You are, and we're just going to get you in, refeed you, and then kind of spit you out again, or get you in, put you in a locked ward, kind of deal with you for a bit, and then get you out again, right? Like it's just
tick the boxes.
There's none of that kind of talk of like you're a person.
Yeah.
And I think just as a general caveat, I think the people in the system do the best they can.
Absolutely.
Some do. Some
they have to work under the system as well.
Exactly. I think the system itself is rotten and needs to be burnt down and start again. And I will critique the system to the cows come home, but the people within the system who are genuinely doing the good work to work with the best that they can, we're not slighting them at all. So it's kind of the same thing. Like you can criticize patriarchy as a whole without saying all men are the problem. It's not that. We're not saying, like, that's not what we talk about when we talk about, like, it's the same sort of thing. It's the overarching umbrella that has massive holes in it. You can't blame the people who are underneath getting wet.
And if you're like you said, if you're in a system that teaches you to treat or be told that, okay, well, eating disorder patients are way too hard. They're lying. They're this. They're that. Well, then you're going to treat them like that because that's the way you've been taught, right? Even if it goes against what you might believe in. Anyway.
Absolutely. Which kind of brings us into, I think, something that probably is important to kind of, I guess, really get into this conversation. What is SEED? What is severe and enduring? Just for people out there that, I'm sure that they've hopefully listened to this podcast long enough, or we've banged on about it a fair bit. But what is SEED? What is a severe and enduring eating disorder? What does it mean and how is it diagnosed? Just so we can think of that snapshot.
Yep.
Yeah, and also before we do jump into that, I realize I probably should have done this at the beginning, but we always do, like when we talk about severe and enduring eating disorders, we're not talking, like I know that a lot of times we talk about anorexia nervosa in this context, and as our regular listeners will know, we don't tend to single out specific eating disorders, and that's no exception today. So we'll be talking about severe and enduring eating disorders in terms of all types of eating disorders, regardless of the diagnosis. So whatever the subtype it is, we're talking about that as a whole. Also, I realize that we're already like 20 minutes in. If this is going to be triggering for you, please stop listening. No, but like in all seriousness, I probably should have put a trigger warning at the start, but yeah, we know that it could be potentially triggering for people because we will be talking about SEED. We'll talk about it at length, obviously. Yeah. We'll be discussing medical trauma, self-harm. So yes, please proceed further with caution and discretion. Sorry. Now back to the question. What is SEED?
So yeah, I completely agree. I am a big advocate for SEED is all diagnoses. It encompasses and spans across all diagnoses, right? It's not limited to AN, which I think a lot of the time the research can focus on.
Yeah.
And whilst it's not a diagnosis itself, which I think is probably noting that it's not, it kind of refers to people with long-standing eating disorders. So, but then again, there's a bit of, I suppose, conflict about the definition, about how many years, or most people say, like most research either talks about 7 to 10 years. And it's focused on, the enduring nature, so the long term, and it also talks about severity. I will preface that with saying that, like, so severe and enduring eating disorders can have periods that aren't severe, right? And if you're, and so I think, there's a lot of talk about, do we need a different word? But I don't think, maybe it's not just about the word, it's about how it's used. Like, for example, like, I know myself, when I first heard the term severe and enduring eating disorder, and thank you to Eating Disorders Victoria for kind of exposing me to that I was like, oh, that's me. I belong somewhere. Like, I'm an adult, and and they were very big on, it's all diagnoses.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to know as well, like, eating disorder diagnoses can change throughout the life cycle, right? Like,
for most people it does.
Yeah. It's the rule, not the exception. Usually.
Yeah. And I mean, even like I said to you at the beginning, like, I mean, and I have, so many clients as well who, it's probably started out as ARFID, right? And then it's morphed into anorexia nervosa, and then it's only when we start unpicking a lot of the stuff, and then add some other compensatory behaviors in there as well. So and
as we know from our ARFID episode, ARFID can't be quote unquote cured, it can just be managed. So this idea of eating disorders being chronic and never being able to be treated, I mean, first of all, depends on how you look at it. Do you classify ARFID as this particular eating disorder? Maybe. Or it could just be part of your neurodiversity.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So is it an issue, or is it like, it's just, I
think, one of the things that I think is frustrating as well, right, is, when you're talking about severe and enduring, and it's about the, we can focus on the enduring nature and stuff like that. But a lot of the times the literature says that you've had multiple attempts at treatment that have been unsuccessful. And that's where sometimes that treatment resistance comes in. And that's where I probably, it's that revolving door of care where once you're labeled with, oh, well, you've gone through the adolescent system and now you're in the adult system.
Yeah.
People find themselves cycling in and out of care. And what does the folder say? The folder says whether it's, it's got seed on it. Everyone, a lot of people assume, oh, okay, well, they're treatment resistant. They're too complex.
Totally.
But how can someone be treatment resistant when I know myself, I've gone inpatient, and, I'm sure we can all probably recognize this. You go in inpatient, you get weight restored if that's, if that's your diagnosis, if that's applicable. And there's very limited psychological support. Or you try to help seek, but because you don't fit criteria, once again in inverted commas, then you can't get help, or you're turned away.
Totally.
Do you actually? And I this is going to probably piss you off, and I apologize. I actually had someone I know who.
We'll prepare ourselves.
So I actually had someone reach out to me today, and she was she sent me this email, and we know each other from various things. So still experiencing moving towards recovery. She's in her 50s, and she was happy for me to share this. But she said, so she went to public hospital today to have she had heartburn and ulcers and things like that, and told the doctor that it's probably from years of anorexia and and things like that. And the doctor said, and I'm reading this verbatim, oh, I only thought young people got that and that you would have grown out of it. And when
fuck off,
that
is what I say to that.
How shame-based.
Also, it's so 90s. Come on, get with the times. That is so 90s.
And agreed.
Only young people get this. Meh. Okay, tell me that you haven't picked up a book in like 3 decades without telling me.
It gets worse.
Oh, great. Awesome. Sorry, I'm wasting my
No,
outrage already.
it's all right. So given, I know her and she's quite a strong individual. So when she corrected the doctor and said, well, no, he then said, oh, well, it must be okay now because you look healthy. And
oh, Jesus Christ.
She literally she yelled at him and burst into tears and she took off.
Oh, God. I just think what's interesting about that is because we have these people that go into the hospital system for help, and this is the sort of shit that they get met with. They burst out in tears, they yell or they scream or they correct, they, stick up for themselves. What label do they get put on them then?
Emotional.
Well, BPD.
Crazy.
BPD.
Oh,
why are you being so hysterical? Well, why are you so upset? And this is where we see so many people get the Mental Health Act put on them because they're actually advocating for themselves. And the doctors, the medical system the psychiatric system is seeing this as resistance.
Yeah.
Well, no, this isn't resistance.
This is they don't know.
Yeah, this is a person actually using their voice.
Yeah.
But I think we have such a system, especially with severe and enduring, where you've lost your voice.
Yeah.
And so when we have somebody that talks back, we just see that slapped on them. And then eventually, I don't know if you found this, Gabby, but I know I did, that you eventually just learn that you don't speak.
If you're talking about distress tolerance, right? Distress tolerance, you're being met with invalidation, shame, stigma, yet, or if in other circumstances you're being told that you need an NG tube or things like that.
Yeah.
And
of course that's freaking distressing.
Yeah. So you have this kind of distress response, and instead of being comforted or being, and if there's neurodivergence associated with that, and you've kind of just had this sprung on you, you're distressed, and then you're being told, oh, well, you've got BPD,
you're being punished for it.
Yeah, or you have security called. I had someone recently say that they just were so overwhelmed by stimulation that they went into their bathroom because the bathroom door was unlocked because they'd left the nursing team had left it unlocked or whatever, and
they found a safe space.
Yeah, so she could cry and things like that, and instead, because she'd gone into the bathroom, security was called and they pulled her out and restrained her after that. That's tell me.
It's just disgusting. It's just absolutely, that is just criminal. I'm sorry. And I also just think I just think it's criminal. I actually just think it's criminal. And why does it need to be so punitive? These people who are so vulnerable, let's be honest, for the most part, we don't need security in to be manhandling these people. We need some compassion.
Are you really that much of a threat? Honestly, no.
Well, God forbid you show emotion.
Compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially dealing in mental health. How do you think people are going to respond when they're at such a level of distress?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to come back to something that you were talking about, of this idea of being treatment resistant. And we were saying you go into the public space and there's no treatment at all. So how can you really be given that definition of treatment resistant? But then if you do receive treatment, like I was very privileged to in the private system, it's one size fits all. It's one treatment. So if you don't respond to that one treatment,
you're treatment resistant.
Then treatment resistant. It's well, no. And there's a great thing on the Eating Disorders Victoria website when they talk about SEED, about this idea of being treatment resistant. And it is, quote, we believe that, quote, people don't fail treatments, treatments fail people. Because it's literally, have you tried everything? No? Then you're not treatment resistant, because
even if you have tried everything, have you tried everything at the right time?
Yes, that too. Under the right set of circumstances.
Yeah.
Have you?
And has the clinician been skilled enough?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think labeling someone treatment resistant or complex, I think it's the clinician kind of showing a lack of skill, kind of like a skill, but almost
way to give up, bro.
Or almost just a lack of kind of being able to swallow their pride a little bit and being you know what, maybe I'm not the clinician for you. Maybe I don't know enough about this and I need to refer you on to somebody who does. And it's just easier for people to kind of just label this person so that they're not, I guess, their pride isn't hurt, maybe.
Yeah, or I'm not able to give you everything. Let's bring someone else in to do it and work with me.
What other pieces of the puzzle can we kind of
exactly.
fill in? Yeah.
like maybe you need a patient advocate because I'm not understanding what your needs are right now, and you need someone who you feel safe enough to talk to. So let me bring someone like that in. But of course they never do that because they're there to make, they just see them as someone to make their lives difficult. Or maybe we should bring in someone who is a psychologist who specializes in XYZ. Let's see if you're neurodivergent. Let's get you on the pathway to a diagnosis. All of these things. What are we missing?
Can I ask? Can I ask Gabby? Because I know that the diagnosis of, in inverted commas, of severe and enduring for somebody should technically open up doors for that person, aka like I know if you've been given this diagnosis of severe and enduring, your treatment, say you're in the medical system that you're in for refeeding or whatever. I know in Queensland we've got very strict protocol around refeeding, and I know that's different state to state, but in Queensland it's quite strict. But I know if you've got a diagnosis of severe and enduring within Queensland under the QEDS protocol, they're allowed to then deviate from the QEDS protocol. So they're allowed to then kind of alter the QEDS protocol to suit that person if they've got that diagnosis. Can you tell me a little more about that, your thoughts on that, and how that kind of transpires? Because I think it doesn't really translate to other kind of areas of treatment, does it? Like it doesn't actually really happen that way, I suppose. So I just wanted to kind of pick your brain about that.
I think it's hard, right? Because we're talking about seed opening up doors. Seed, I don't think opens up doors. I think it closes doors.
Yeah, agree.
I also think what it does is it starts to perpetuate that rotating door, which is we've given you this term and we've gone, okay, well, we know that you're just going to come in, we'll refeed you if that's what you need, and you'll just keep coming through. We'll discharge you, then you'll come back in, and that's going to be your
life. Kind of like set up that way. Yeah.
And I've also speak to people and they're like, well, since I was given that term, like I don't get the care that other people get because it's just assumed that I'll come back in. Yeah. Or
they can do the bare minimum.
Yeah. So, and I get there's a issue with resources and, I mean, I was very...
Shouldn't matter.
I was very fortunate to be part of Eating Disorders Victoria's pilot program for SEED. I worked on that team from the inception. Yeah. I started as a lived experience advisor on that, and then went into the kind of coordination role, and then peer mentor and facilitator and things like that, which I felt very lucky to be a part of. But that was the only place that I had come across where we, yes, we didn't always talk about recovery. We met people where they were, and we could sit with it, with that discomfort, and we could talk about what does SEED mean to you. Whereas I don't think there is anywhere else that I'm aware of that has a safe space to talk about SEED and to hold people where they are. Like I know, here in WA we have a peer-led group called Body Esteem Program that's run by the government. They're all lived experience people, and I know I've got some SEED clients who've gone into there and that. But SEED as a no, I don't think there's a program, and I don't think there's anywhere where you can go and be like, also have that hope held for you, right? Like I am the to my knowledge the only person in WA that I only see SEED clients. That
is terrifying for an entire state.
I mean, other clients will, there are other clinicians out there who will see, but for me, that is the only people I will see. Yeah, because I know what it's like to have, and especially, I have clients that, go into hospital and then, when you've had long-standing, severe and enduring, anorexia nervosa, and people want you to go on 3 meals and 3 snacks and, your bolus and your nasal gastric, and that's really overwhelming. And then you get told, oh no, well, we're going to chuck you out in the Mental Health Act because you're not meeting the criteria. But it was like, well, we're not meeting their needs, and we're not understanding their history and neurodiversity and the impacts of
putting them into a box.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then they go, they go across to a under the Mental Health Act, go to the public hospital, and the public hospital goes, oh, well, we don't know what to do about this. We'll discharge you.
They also have zero capacity for an eating disorder kind of patient really in the public psychiatry. I always find it so interesting when I've had it a lot recently actually, where psychiatrists, private psychiatrists have kind of said, look, I don't think that we can have, like, you belong in the private system right now. I think you need to go into the public system and go, why didn't they admit you psychiatrically publicly? And I'm just like, well, why? Like, this person actually needs specialist eating disorder care. Why would they be admitted psychiatrically publicly? Because they're going to receive none of that. Like, very likely we're going to see patients kind of sit in a public system and, like you said, with no monitoring, like none of that. So like how would that progress a person at all? And I just find it so interesting because I know. And
then you also, add the complexity of it's too sick, not sick enough, right? You're too sick for private, or you're not sick enough for public. And if you don't fit the stereotypical anorexia nervosa profile.
Yes. I also have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got a lot of thoughts. This is going to end up being a 5-hour episode.
This is going like a full-on tangent. Well, what that just triggered inside of me was then that interesting concept of then, right? Like, you can say you've got the private system, you can be admitted into the private system, right? But then it's kind of turning into, I think, a lot of our private system is just wanting the very straighty 180 eating disorders. What I'm kind of seeing lately, like with a lot of my severe and enduring clients, is that they're going to the private system and then they're kind of having psychiatrists that are like, they don't want them back. Discharge you. Well, I don't want to, I guess, revolve door you.
But I think that's the thing, right? Like, I mean, I know so many clients that, have been told, no, you're too complex. I'm not going to. No,
totally.
we're not going to see you.
We don't have this. Yeah, we don't have the capacity for that.
Yeah, and then you try to put a referral in, or you do a supporting letter to a hospital, whether it's private or you just want some general respite for them in a
totally.
And no, we won't touch them.
Too complex as well. Yeah, like too unwell.
So you can't be. Yeah, there's nowhere, right?
Mm.
We know that evidence-based treatments, they only a small amount of clients, right? So why do we keep doing things? And it's also that what perpetuates the stigma and invalidation, right? If I'm going and seeing a clinician who can't sit with their own discomfort, and I'm not, whatever it is, I'm not making changes fast enough, or my motivation to change is not there, like that's not taking into consideration any of the treatment I've done before and the experiences I've had, plus anxiety, neurodivergence, all the things that we can talk about, right? And
totally.
Yet that clinician, and this is not, once again, not bagging clinicians, but if you can't sit with,
totally not.
If the manual says, if by, I was going to say episode 5, that's not session 5. If by session 5 you haven't made any progress, I need to discharge you from my care, because otherwise I'm engaging in therapist drift and I'm not actually giving anything for you. Instead of no, what I kind of gave you my example of my own story, right? I finally had someone who held the space for me, who actually saw me not just as an eating disorder, but understood there was anxiety, there was, historical things that had happened in my childhood. Like,
which, is that not progress? Like, is that not, like, if we looked at progress, I believe that is progress. It might not be progress in terms of, the DSM, or progress in terms of, this standard treatment model. But it's progress that you sat there on that couch and you had somebody see you for you. And what did that do for you?
Yeah.
Had you ever had that before? What impact did that then have on you, and what were you able to do post that? You kept showing up to the psychologist and maybe opened up a lot more. And, people, like, half the time, people just need a place to be.
Yeah. And, I use that moment as well. And I love my psychologist, and I mean, I don't see her anymore. I haven't for a long time. I still send her little updates of, like, when I got into my PhD, and I was like, and
I love it. She must be so freaking proud.
Oh, we just get little emails back and forth on the odd occasion, but
love it.
Like, that moment for me changed my whole fucking life. Like, that if you asked me to pinpoint where recovery started for me, it was that point. And got goosebumps. Because it did. It was finally someone wasn't treating me like a number, or like, and doesn't that, I mean, and then we've got a system that doesn't do that because we have to follow a manual, or we have to refeed, or when we're refeeding we can't do psychological treatment, or we need, you don't know what you need, you're distressed, or must be BPD, or no, we need to hold you down. And where's the compassionate care in there when people that with lived experience who have gone through it are saying the thing that mattered the most to me was someone help, like, just was like, yeah, it's okay, I believe in you. Like,
yeah,
that was me on my soapbox. Sorry.
Yeah. Can I ask with that, where do you think seed treatment needs to go? Like, what?
That was going to be that was going to get us there as well, Cal.
We love soapbox. Well, I think it naturally leads into that, right? Like, what do you think
totally
it needs?
Does.
And as an expert in the field, really, like, what do you think it needs?
Yeah, because I know that, and we always kind of run into this trap on this podcast, not that it's not deserving, where we tend to just kind of bash what's not working. And there's absolutely space for that. But we always say on this podcast, we want people should go and seek help. And obviously when you're listening to this, it's like, well, fuck, why would I go seek help if this is what's in store for me? And I don't blame you. But it's all about finding the right treatment.
This is why we talk about it.
This is why we talk about it. And also to the clinicians who are listening, if you want advice on, well, what can I do? Well, listen up, because Gabby's going to tell you. We're all going to tell you. It's like, this is what we can do on an individual basis. Even if we can't change the system, you're 100% in control of the actions that you take with the patients that you see.
Yeah.
So, yes, to the people who are listening, who maybe are clinicians or who are carers, or those people who are diagnosed with SEED, who can they send this part to and be like, hey, do this?
Yeah. So I suppose, and this is not a shameless plug, I recently, with my research team, published a paper on the impacts of perceived clinician stigma from a lived experience voice, right? There's a lot of research out there that talks about stigma from, towards eating disorders from clinicians, but there's not a lot about how it actually impacts the patient experience. And what we really found with that is, well, one, there's very limited research out there that looks at that, but the reported impact is significant on the patient experience, right? And I think one of the I suppose the points is, when people are already in a vulnerable state, if we're talking about malnutrition as well, and we're talking about anxiety and neurodivergence, and that power dynamic, right? I go into the GP and I tell you that I'm really worried that I've got an eating disorder, or I've been making myself sick. And you then, one of the things we found in the journal article, like when we did our review, was someone had gone in even and was trying to say, look, I make myself sick. And they were like, oh, but, you can still lose a little bit of weight, or, maybe you just need to go on a diet, right? And even someone had said, had gone in for sinus infection and had come out with a referral to a gastroenterologist for a gastric bypass, right? That's not okay. I get that.
It's fucked.
Yeah. And so if you're going in and you're not being seen or heard, right? Like, compassionate care is so important. I think one of the things that it doesn't matter what illness, what kind of person you are, we can all remember, and we kind of talked, and Callie, you mentioned as well, right? Those moments where you were met with compassionate care. A lot of clients I work with who have gone through the eating disorder system are now, either if they're in recovery or even, friends. I worked at a place that had a significant, at Eating Disorders Victoria, quite a large lived experience workforce. People have gone into this field because one person was nice to them, and that one person changed their life, and they, and the rest of the experience was horrendous, right? I mean, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, right? Like, 'cause same thing, right? There's a reason why I only work in this space, and I think we have to question why we do things. Like, you would never, if you had a cancer patient who was undergoing chemo treatment and was distressed, you wouldn't call security on them, right? So why is it okay to do that to an eating disorder patient? Yeah, why is that the norm? You know, when you talk to people about just even I get we're all under resource pressures, and you know, spending time with people, and it's very limited, and we've got to push through and KPIs, right? But also being just even a squeeze of the shoulder, a handhold, right? Like you said, and Ash, you also said before, I don't like, if I'm a clinician that doesn't understand, okay, where can I go? Where can I go to get help?
And like, we hear about those the people who make such a difference in patients' lives, where the one person changed everything for them. Be that person. If you're a clinician, be that person.
I think we've spoken about it previously, Gabby, just around, like, we understand that sometimes, I guess, punitive things may need to occur, but I think there's a way to do it, right? Like, so I know that we've spoken about before, like, there's a way of doing things. So I find it interesting that, I guess, in the public system, say NG feeding needs to happen. That's, you know, one specific example. There's a way to kind of do that that's less punitive, that's like gives the patient autonomy. And I always find it very interesting that, and not to toot my own horn, but I always find it very interesting that when I'm involved in that process, it kind of goes off without a hitch. But when I'm not involved in that process, it's a disaster.
No, toot that horn. Honestly, it's so important to have a lived experience advocate
Well, I just find that very interesting, don't you?
I think what's really interesting is, like you're talking about, it's instead of treatment being done to you, it's being done with you, right? Mm-hmm. Same kind of thing. I've had clients who have gone under, you know, the Mental Health Act, and it's been distressing, but they can understand that they need to be there, right? I've gone in and sat with a client in hospital for a few hours, and she put her own NG tube in, right? And could do that because we talked about it. We talked about, okay, the rationale. Why do we need to do this? She's also neurodivergent, like we're now finding most of our clients are, right?
It's not a coincidence, is it?
Yeah. And when there's this rigidity of thinking, if one, you know, and this was one thing I find, is that we've all been in a hospital, right? Regardless of setting, where one person will come in and say something, and then the next person comes in and says something completely different. That consistency in care, that messaging, especially for someone who is neurodivergent, who may have, you know, a brain that's operating on limited nutrition.
Yeah.
The black or white, like, explain things to me. I might not like that you're going to do this, like, we're going to have to do this, but if I can understand the why, and I can have
autonomy
or informed consent as well.
Yeah, right? And actually realize that this is a distressing thing. And I think it's that humanistic part that's missing, right? Like, you know, even with clients that, you know, in eating disorder programs where we're all sitting around and having to eat food together. If I'm distressed because I don't eat in front of anyone, understand that. If there's someone that and I can't remember for the life of me who told me this, but in a private eating disorders program and had eaten everything else on their plate, bar like the little thing of butter that you get, right? And was made to stand up in front of everyone and eat the butter.
Eat
Are you serious?
The butter.
Oh my fucking God, are you joking?
Gross.
So,
are you joking?
No, I'm not joking.
How is that not reportable?
But it becomes part of the systemic issue, which is
Jesus Christ.
That's how we're taught that's how an eating disorder program works. You need to eat everything on your plate. Yeah. Stand up and in front of everyone, you eat that
so
slither of butter. Right?
Yeah, okay, cool. Would you ever do that to someone who doesn't have an eating disorder in like everyday life? If you're at a dinner party, would you say, "Oh, Candace, you didn't eat the butter that I carefully put out for you. I want you to stand up and eat it in front of all of your friends." You wouldn't do that. And if you did, well, then you're also a sadist. But Jesus Christ.
I've had circumstances where, I guess I flagged with, the nursing unit manager or whoever's on charge that day on a ward, kind of like, the way this thing is being done is probably not the best way to do it. If we could maybe consider this for the patient and this for the patient, do it this way, I think you'll have a lot, it'd be a lot easier for you. Like that's the interesting thing to me. It actually makes their job easier if you actually take a trauma-informed approach. So I just explained that. I was waiting for her to like arc up back at me, and I just was ready for a fight, but she didn't give it to me. She was quite reasonable, which was great, but annoying.
How rude.
But then, we overheard a nurse who, this messaging was then given to, because there was a particular nurse in question. And this nurse, the next time they had to do this thing, it was bolus feeds. The next time they had to do this thing, they were like, oh, better not do that. Don't want to traumatize the patient. And it's just like, why are you wanting to traumatize the patient?
But also just to like trivialize trauma that much as well. It's like, you hear the same shit on fucking social media now, which is like, oh, everything's triggering. Oh, careful, I don't want to trigger anyone. It's like, imagine can you just like not be a dick?
Just don't be a dick, yeah.
And and maybe maybe that's the slogan for but
it should be the slogan for life. Honestly, just don't be a fucking dickhead.
But I kind of going back to that example that I shared with you earlier about the client that's in her 50s, right? If she had been met different with compassionate care and saying, oh, okay, so, you're an older, okay, understand you're an older woman still with a history of an eating disorder. Okay, oh no, okay, how can, that might be contributing to this. That would be a completely different outcome instead of she's then emailing me to say, this just happened to me. What the fuck? Actually having someone that just validates your experience. Even like, we're talking about the dehumanization, right? And yes, we can understand that there are things that need to occur. And sometimes, yes, the Mental Health Act is appropriate, depending on how it's delivered and things like that. But I think what happens, and this is where kind of my PhD research about this medical trauma, right, is because we have these initial experiences that shape us. So for me, and we could chart this out for nearly any client, right? Is you have that for one, an eating disorder. Okay, there's stigma with mental health if you grew up in the 90s like me. Then you go and seek help, and you're met with dismissal. So you withdraw, and you keep it hidden, or you just keep going, right? And then you have your next touch point. And for me, that was the BPD, here's some meds, ignore the eating disorder, it's just BPD. And having that constantly reinforced. So all that does is it keeps feeding the eating disorder. It keeps telling me I am not sick enough, or I'm too sick, or I'm mentally unwell. This, the eating disorder is an issue. I'm the problem. I'm the one to blame. I can't be trusted to know my own self. I can't be trusted to eat a meal by myself. I can't trusted to go to the toilet by myself. And so how does that standard of care doesn't align with what needs to happen? That punitive approach, it's not working, right? And like we said, current treatment options are not working. And when we're talking about severe and enduring, and people who have had longer term eating disorders, there's more likely to be complex trauma. We know there's more likely to be neurodiversity. So yet we're telling them that, oh no, that's your eating disorder talking, and you're lying to us because that's your eating disorder, without acknowledging any other part of that person.
Yeah. Can I ask you then, and I know the answer, but we need you to broadcast it.
We need the soundbite.
Can I ask you then, do we have a system that is creating severe and enduring eating disorders?
So, I mean, this is a very controversial one, and I don't want to get hate mail. Yes, I believe so. I think as it stands, and look, my first touch point with the system was in the early 2000s. We're now in 2025. There have been shifts,
There have
right?
been advancements.
So I don't want to poo-poo that, because there have...
No, absolutely, there has been, yeah. There's a lot of incredible people doing a lot of incredible things. Absolutely.
I think it definitely comes with the increase, I would say, at like almost, because back when 10 years ago when I was going through care, the idea of lived experience clinicians just didn't exist. So I think the mass influx of lived experience clinicians has made such a huge difference.
I think there's that disjoint again between the public and the private as well. Like, the way that kind of, the punitive way kind of, I guess, protocols operate in, the medical and the psychiatric. And I guess that they don't speak together, do they? So it's like...
I'm probably going to disagree with you there.
Okay. Please do.
And not to be combative, because that's not what I want to do.
No.
But,
no. Please do.
I also think that...
You're being really conversation resistant, Gabby. I think we need to talk about it.
Oh, God.
What a dick.
Mic drop.
Love.
No, but I think, I'm not saying the public system's the public system, right? We know that, and we know there's resources, and, people get burnt out, right? But I also don't think the private system is working, right?
Oh, I completely agree with you. Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that example
definitely
about...
not combative, yeah.
That example about the butter, that was done inpatient private, right? The locked doors, inpatient private. Like, there's... But I think that there's challenges with both. Like, I recently spoke with someone who's in residential care. It's more, I suppose, more open, and as in, like, there's more flexibility, there's less punitive approaches, but there are still considerations that are not like...
Oh, absolutely there is. I think it's still, like, not neurodivergent friendly. It's not trauma, it's 100%. It's not built for people. It's certainly, I don't think, built for people with severe and enduring.
Yeah, and so I think when we go back to, and I realise we've probably diverted from the question.
That's so fine.
Ash, can I go back to a point that you said though earlier about lived experience? Because it was one of the things I spoke recently at, it's called CoreAD. So it's a new kind of worldwide consortium. I was asked to present about my lived experience, and I talked about that it blows my mind that nearly 10 years ago, I was in a locked ward. And now you're interviewing me on a podcast, and I was speaking at an event. I'm a clinician. Like, I'm doing my PhD, right? I've got my master's, I've got my PhD. How? Like, if you would ask me 10 years ago if that could be a thing, I would have gone, no way. What I think that does is it changes the landscape. We're talking about these things more. Yes, there is still going to be stigma and judgment, but there are people out there who, hand on heart, say, and I will never censor myself to say that, when I moved to WA from Melbourne, when I started at my workplace, I was like, hand on heart, I'm a lived experience clinician. I will not practice any other way because...
Yeah, makes such a difference. Without lived experience, what do we have?
Yeah, and if that means someone feels seen...
Do you think this kind of push towards lived experience is breaking the hierarchy a bit too?
Yeah, and I think I definitely think it is, and I think it's being more widely acknowledged, right? Because, like...
Yeah, for sure.
I am very fortunate that a lot of people reach out to me, and, I've had people from New Zealand, Canada, even China reach out to me and say... How do you do it? Some people will hate me, right? Some people will not like me. Some people will not like that I'm using my voice to say that the system needs to change. But the way we help break down stigma, the way we help people who are already in this, like, and I'm talking about healthcare providers, healthcare providers that may have been trained in, 20, 30 years ago and go, oh, eating disorders, well, that's bloody Kate Moss and, that crew, right? Right. But what we do, if by doing this is how we break it down. If that means, give you another example, I've got a client that I love dearly, probably not supposed to say that about clients, but, I love all my clients, but went into hospital, went into emergency, and the consultant there said, oh, you've lost this much weight in these many days. How did you do it? I wish I knew.
Like bad to worse.
Wait.
Oh shit! I didn't expect that last bit.
I did not expect that last bit either. Oh
wait for it. Oh, I want to know your secret. And she turned around and said, "I'm fucking anorexic." And the fact that she is fighting so hard, and she could turn around and still say that to a consultant doctor, that doctor might not remember it, but I'm sure as hell,
Far out, Brussels sprout.
You've got to think that is when someone can turn around and go, no, that's not appropriate. And you've got a client, like a patient calling you out. We are making changes. We are like...
Oh, I think it's so incredible that we're empowering people to have their voice again, right? Because I think as I said earlier, and I'm sure you experience as well, your voice just gets taken off you, especially with SEED. I think it's very convenient for clinicians to have you kind of cycle in and out and have those labels put upon you, because you do slowly lose your voice, don't you? So when we have people use their voice, that's how we break this.
Yeah. And it also, I think, it reinforces that the system isn't doing it right now. And,
Totally.
I can, she can, I can, we can use our voice to go, no, this isn't right. And yes, we still might be met with some punitive care, but we have resources now. We have outlets. We have advocates. I practice as a counsellor. I have my psych degree, and I was going to do my master's in clin psych, and then I went, no, because I need to practice with my lived experience. So I did my master in counselling, and I use my lived experience. I still operate under my scope of practice, but I will rock up to a hospital and I will advocate for someone if that's what they need.
Totally.
Because they've never had that before.
And we change it from the inside, not the outside.
I also think that, and we discussed this with Dr. Rachel Hogg on the TikTok episode, and she brought up a very, very good point, which was it gets very exhausting having to get the people who are affected to have to constantly advocate for themselves and constantly do the work, and it's really fucking frustrating. However, the system itself is so large and immovable. The things that we can move are ourselves. So when we're talking about how you can advocate for yourself in the system if you are struggling within it, it's about finding people with lived experience, finding the clinicians who can back you and hear you, demand second opinions, and honestly, I know we keep saying like, oh, the voice gets taken away. Refuse to have, like, you revoke your consent for your voice to be taken away. And if you can't do that, then find an advocate who will do it for you. I mean, there are 2 people on this call who already do that that's their bread and butter. So it's like there are people out there who will do that for you. Yeah, and absolutely. I think this does lead me to the question that I already know the answer, but we've got a microphone, so I'm going to ask it anyway. I think there are a lot of people who are listening on this call who may have severe and enduring eating disorders thinking, is there hope? That's the question.
Yes, it's really an interesting thing to, because once again, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said no. I remember very clearly being in hospital and I felt like there was this grey smog in front of me. I wasn't being supported by anyone. I didn't have a proper team. You only have to spend a little bit of time with me to know I am constantly all about holding the hope, because when I couldn't hold it for myself, that's what my therapist did.
I love it so much.
Right? Like, she believed, and we didn't have to say the R word, recovery or whatever that is, but the fact is that she knew that and she, and I say it to all my clients, you deserve better. But even reflecting about, instead of this blaming and shaming, looking at your journey with self-compassion and going, well, no wonder I developed an eating disorder, because
totally.
Oh, look,
no wonder I still have it.
Yeah, I'm neurodivergent. I grew up in this. I experienced this complex trauma, or whatever the perfectionism, anxiety. We talk about genetics, and I'm always saying this, so I do apologize. But genetics loads the gun, and the environment pulls the trigger, right? So no fucking wonder you have an eating disorder. So instead of beating yourself up for it, how do we understand how it's come about, what it's serving, and how we can learn other things, how we can be kind to ourselves? And, I remember the first time that my therapist said the word self-compassion, and I was ready to just set her whole clinic on fire, right? And now I am the first person that will talk about self-compassion. But even like, you know, I do this like kind of rubbing my chest and rubbing my heart. Even when I'm nervous now, I still do that. Like what my therapist said was just like, I just rub my heart and I go, it's going to be okay. You know, and it's those small things. And, you know, having someone believe in you. Like I used to always, not in a creepy way, but like I used to say to my therapist, like I'd kind of imagine her, kind of a little version of her living in my ear and being like, what would she say to me? What would she say to me?
Totally. Yeah. It's such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
Because it helps to kind of externalize that.
Especially if you feel like, honestly, especially if you've been told over and over again, you can't be trusted, you can't be trusted. It's like, okay, well, instead of beating yourself up for and thinking, okay, well, I can't be, how about you have that person in your ear? Okay, what would they say? If you're sort of almost losing faith that you can't be trusted, first of all, don't believe them. But also, if sometimes you just need to separate yourself from that, it's like, okay, if I can't be trusted, what would the person I trust think, and what would they say?
I always say turn your eating disorder onto me. So like make your eating disorder mad at me. So like, you know, throw me under the bus, you know, like, so like if you needing to do XYZ or whatever, and you know, it's arcing up and like trying to, you know, externalize that rather than externalizing it, turn it onto you. You can turn it onto me if you want. You can blame it on me. You can, you know, so it's not that self-blame.
The reason I wanted to ask this question, even though we all know the answer, it's because I think that idea of losing hope is so common, and I know that there is a lot of things that are problematic with people who's like, oh well, if they can do it, you can do it too, because not everyone will have the same circumstances, and not everyone will have the same access to treatment. Not everyone will have their financial barriers. I know all of this nuance. However, there are lots of people who are diagnosed with SEED. And I think in this particular instance, when they say you're treatment resistant, you're not. We will tell you right now, you are not treatment resistant. You just haven't found the right treatment at the right time for you.
I think, yeah, and you would know this, Gabby, I think with severe and enduring, you kind of very much do subscribe to the this is just my life now. And that's the narrative you were given, and you kind of gear up to kind of just, okay, so this is just it. How do we like live a life of this? Do we live a life of this, right? So, and I think it's very rare, realistically, unfortunately, to meet other people who have recovered from a severe and enduring eating disorder. So it's just so nice to hear. Like, I think it's just such an important message.
Yeah, and I think, you know, going back to that lived experience for us and our stories, the fact that we're talking about this, right? The fact that I'm able to do research in this area and have people contact me.
From a lived experience lens as well.
Yeah.
Which is so important.
Right. And the fact that there's more of us out there, you know, back to my shameless plug for my last article that I published. But
Link
even when
in the
we're
description below.
But when we talk about stigma in general in mental health, right? Yes, training, education programs can assist, right? Not very much. It's showing that those don't have as much of an impact. What really does have an impact, and especially if we're talking about, you know, training for medical students and things like that, is having someone come in and talking about their lived experience. So there was there's Thornycroft et al. Can't remember exactly, don't have it in front of me, but they found that if you had access to meeting someone who was going through that and you got to talk about it, or you got to hear their story, you realized there's a human on that.
Yeah.
And it's not about the books anymore. And I think that's where, you know, when we're talking about hope and we're talking about change and all those things, and, you know, like we said, we want to keep this, you know, we want to talk about what can change and how. Like, the fact is, you know, 2 weeks ago, I was standing up in front of a mental health professional network thing, talking about my own lived experience, right? I was at a conference 2 months ago.
Recovery from a severe and enduring eating disorder.
Yeah. I was standing up at a conference talking about it. I'm now here with you two talking about it, right? Someone may send it to their family. Someone might, you know, say, hey, can you listen to this? Or there might, you know, and if that hits one person, right, there's a trickle effect. You know, I've been really fortunate, you know, and Callie, once again, you'd know this, we've gone into work in this space, right? We're not the only people. There are countless people at universities who are going into mental health. Yeah, right? Or are doing peer work. And are saying, I want my voice to be heard and I want to help someone. If I can help just one person, and you know that there's going to be more than that one person. If you've gone on to go through your own severe and enduring eating disorder and now you're a registered psych, how much have you fought to get there? Like, holy fuck balls.
Honestly, like you've fought like a complete system that believes you cannot recover.
You've given the middle finger to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to bring us in for a landing.
I was going to say.
What I really want to hear from you, Gabby, is what brings you the most joy now?
Oh, that's a good question. I know you prepped me with this, and but it's a big question, right? The quiet is probably what I'm going to say.
Goosebumps.
This head used to be filled with so much noise and so much overthinking and pain and never communicating when I felt unheard or things like that. I just shut, to be now, and it's taken time and it takes practice, right? To voice my needs, to learn what my needs are, right? To learn who I am outside of my eating disorder. I mean, I'm still all about eating disorders. I mean, but
you're Gabby.
Yeah. And I always tried to self-censor. I always thought I was too loud. I should be more this. I should be more that. And now I couldn't give a flying fuck, right?
I get to just be Gabby.
Right? Even I think that, and that is such a beautiful thing to be like.
It is.
I mean, like everyone, I have times where I've walked away from something and I've gone, oh my God, did I just say that? Like, rein it in.
Me as I order my coffee.
But I've now and maybe, even talking about the recovery journey, right? And I know we're rounding down, but like the recovery journey, like I always thought, like you kind of get taught, maybe this is another episode, weight restoration equals everything's perfect and life goes, whereas
dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, I had to and this is why I suppose treatment needs to be multifaceted, right? Because we are all multifaceted. So learning about my anxiety, learning about perfectionism, learning about likely neurodivergence, and realizing that feelings and are part of the human experience. It's not meant to be perfect, which if you'd said that to me 10 years ago, I would have had a panic attack, right? It's not meant to be perfect. It's a journey. It's about learning. It's about making mistakes. It's about finding your tribe, right? Like,
to be alive is chaos. I love that quote.
Yeah.
And to also be unapologetically yourself. Because I think as people with eating disorders, we've spent a lot of time apologizing for ourselves and apologizing for the way we are, and especially if you're neurodivergent. I was
going to say, yeah.
As I've definitely learnt over the last few months, having just been really newly diagnosed, is, you feel like you have to apologize for the way you are. And I think it's coming to terms with the fact that you really don't have to do that anymore, because I can't help the way I am, just like how other people can't help the way they are, in terms of how they're, obviously we have accountability on our choices and our values and those kind of things, but in terms of the way we're built and the way our brains are especially, and our genetics and what we've been through and choices we've made in the past, I think, you just, sometimes we can't change what's happened, but we can also stop apologizing for things that are out of our control.
Agree. Mic drop.
Oh no, I'm not allowed to have the last word. It's Gabby who has to have the last word.
Oh no, why do I? No, but I thought that was beautiful.
Thank you so much, Gabby. And I know that this is, we always, I feel like I don't say it enough in terms of when we chat with our guests, in terms of thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your stories. And we've had so many guests say like, oh, this is the first time I've spoken about it publicly. I'm like, we feel so privileged that we can hold that space for people, and you know, that they trust us enough to talk about this, because it is really hard sometimes. And I know a lot of people say like, yeah, I went through an eating disorder and I just can't talk about it, but I really appreciate you sharing those things. I'm like, and that's why we do it, right? And just because one person shares their story and one other person doesn't come into like bravery or anything, just personal preference. But yes, we do want to say thank you for sharing what is honestly can be and is a very traumatic time in people's lives. Never lost on us. So we really, really appreciate it. And we need so many more people like you in this space. Oh my goodness.
We do, always.
Yeah.
I will,
For the love of God.
I will say, you know, there are a lot of lived experience people out there who are starting
There's
to...
a lot of incredible people now.
Yeah, and I feel very privileged, but I also feel very privileged to, you know, to be a lived experience clinician. You know, at the beginning, every time I see a new client, I talk about my own lived experience, because I think that helps to build that trust and therapeutic alliance. And it's the same thing when I do my research. So when I speak to people, you know, I let them know that, yes, whilst they're sharing their story with me, I don't tell them my story, but I let them know that I have lived experience, so that they know, and hopefully they know that their story is safe with me, and I will honor that space, because I do think it's really important to, you know, and this is what's such a beautiful space about you guys' podcast, and I think you really should give yourselves a pat on the back, because you probably don't do that enough. Because people are listening to this and people are going, oh wow, there's some people who are my tribe, or oh wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just think you guys need to kind of giving yourself a bit of reflection for the last 2 years that you've done this podcast, and just
Thank you. Yeah, I always have these moments where I'm like, I kind of wish that I'd kind of gone into the clinician space, or a lived experience kind of route. And I think at this point for me, it's a bit too late, because I've sunken so much time and money into my other career. But at the same time, this is almost...
You did such an incredible job on
But this is why we do this podcast, right? It's like, for me, it's an opportunity to do what I almost wish that I could have done in terms of being a clinician, but, you know, hopefully still making an impact. But I also think that Callie and everyone that we've interviewed is such an untapped resource for information, lived experience, and, you know, sharing stories, and also qualitative advice on what we can change, right? So yeah, I think we're only made better by the people that we have on, and we really appreciate the fact that people like you are continuing to share with us, which, you know, because we're kind of nothing without other people's lived experience.
Yeah, but also, I mean, just even now I'm going to therapize you, just from a perspective of, you know, you saying I wish I did this, or, you know, regretting it, or I've sunk too much money into this. Sometimes, also sometimes stand back on the balcony. You may not be a clinician in inverted commas in your own right, but what you're doing is therapy. This is therapy. I'm going to go away from this.
For so many people listening.
Yeah, and even for your guests who come on, right? I mean, like, even talking about this, like I look at you two and I go, how lucky am I? How, like...
Oh, stop it.
No. This isn't a circle
jerk.
I
love it. No, I love it. No, we're all about this.
But I think, you know, like...
Circle jerk, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I know.
I love that. That's amazing.
But it's...
I mean, also, it is helpful because, you know, we can be loud and opinionated about it, and I don't have a license that they can take away, so... What you gonna do? Come at me. Oh, well, before we get too sappy, where can people find you? Because we need more of you. And yeah, where can people find all things Gabby?
Jesus, that's a concern.
That sounds so creepy.
If you don't, then that's totally fine as well.
No. I'm more than happy to be found. I have a very unique name, so you can find me pretty easily. But you know, LinkedIn is usually the best way to reach out to me. Otherwise, you know, you can find me on the UQ website. You can find me at the Swan Centre website. I mean, you know, I'm even with my clients. I see clients all around Australia, even though I'm based in WA. Like, I do telehealth And
that's good to know.
Yeah, but also even just from a perspective of peer to peer, like if you ever just want to chat, I like talking. My mom always says Gab by name, Gab by nature, but you know, so yeah, please reach out and yeah, so even if it's just pointing to a resource, I'm always happy to do that. This is, you know,
amazing. Oh, well, this has been such an awesome chat, and I've really, really enjoyed listening to everything you've had to say. So yes, we very much appreciate it. And now we need to leave because it's so hot. Oh my God.
It's ridiculous.
I've been taking like fan breaks. It's been insane.
Shifting my butt because I've just got sweat like stuck to the chair.
I'm a hot mess. Anyway.
Lovely.
That's all for today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you like what you hear, please consider giving us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can follow us on YouTube and Instagram at pavedwithgoldpod. Send us an email at pavedwithgoldpod@gmail.com or visit our website pavedwithgoldpodcast.com. All of those links will be in the show notes along with extra resources and where you can find Gabby. And until next time, stay safe and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye. This podcast is general in nature and has not taken your personal circumstances or medical history into account. We are here to share our own experiences and the things that we have found helpful throughout our own personal recovery journeys. Please remember that each person's journey and circumstances are different, and not all of the information contained in this podcast may be relatable to you. It's important you consult your own GP or recovery team to seek out tailored advice before making any important decisions relating to your own health and recovery process. If you have found any of the content in this episode distressing, please contact your care team or a medical professional. If you or someone you know is in crisis and needs help now, please contact emergency services in your region immediately.